Okay, hi there, and welcome to FormAssembly's first webinar of 2020. We're super excited about this topic. It's how to set yourself up to scale, not fail with your data collection practices in 2020. And with me today, I've got two great subject matter experts from FormAssembly. We have Katrina Garza, our Director of Customer Success, and Jordan Schartz, who is our Enterprise Account Executive. So Katrina and Jordan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Maggie. Happy to be here.
Hey, great to be here, Maggie.
Awesome. So we are just going to pretty much dive right into the content today. But first, I just want to give a brief overview of what FormAssembly is, just some of our main features for those of you who are totally new to the platform, don't know anything about us. Essentially, FormAssembly is an all-in-one web form building and data collection platform with a combination of our easy-to-use form builder, robust integration to Salesforce, and high security and compliance standards. Companies are able to save time, money, and effort in their day-to-day processes and get the maximum benefit out of the data they collect. So as you can tell, one of the things we're really passionate about here at FormAssembly is helping companies be more productive with their data collection. And that's kind of leads into what we're talking about today, scaling with digital data collection. There are a lot of companies that use inefficient methods for data collection or experience broken processes. So some of those inefficient methods might be collecting through paper forms, might be collecting information through emails, storing it in spreadsheets that aren't connected to the rest of your system. You know, in these situations with these realities, scaling is almost impossible. So throughout this webinar, Katrina and Jordan are going to talk about how to assess your current situation, plan for change, and leverage digital data collection for better processes going forward. So I'm going to pass it over to Katrina, and she's going to walk you through how to start scaling your digital data collection process.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Maggie. Thanks for that handoff. Yes, I'd like to start. We want to start with number one, and that's to look at where you are, assess how you're actually collecting data, and look at all the different places in which you are collecting data. All right, so picking back up, you want to get a sense for all the different ways you're collecting data for your processes. And again, I wanted to stress that it's not only externally, you definitely want to assess all the different ways in which you're collecting data externally, whether that be an application on your website, whether that be a contact us form, or you're sending forms, or you're trying to collect data via an email. You want to kind of lay out all of this information, make a flow chart. I think that's really the best way to collect that data, or to understand and assess where that data is coming from. And then I think you also want to think about your endpoint. Where do we need that data to be? Is it one report? Is it in a CRM, for example, like ServiceNow or Salesforce, or maybe it's something else that you guys have custom built? Does that data need to ultimately end up there? So that way you can run one report instead of 4 or 5 different reports on this data and manually accumulate and put that together. So again, you want to scale up so that way you are working smarter and not harder in collecting this data. And that's really what scaling up is being more efficient, being able to collect this data in a way where you're able to grow and expand and collect more data and send it to maybe one source of truth instead of like 7. All right, what are your issues with your current process? Again, going back to maybe creating a flow chart for yourself. I think, again, that's a really great way to start is, all the different points. We're collecting data via an email, we're collecting data via contact us form or an application. Make a flow chart for yourself and then figure out where that data is ending up in your flow chart. Where do we need it to be? Where is it ending up now? And then that'll help you navigate where you actually want it to be in the end. So think about your pain points in your current process. Again, a flow chart is a really great place to start and kind of see visually where that data is ending up and where those pain points are. Are you having to do too much manual work? Let's say you were, like my example before was you're collecting that information via an Excel sheet or a Google spreadsheet, and then you're ending up having to upload that data, for example, into your CRM in the end so you can have one data point. But why not see if there's the ability to skip that middle point and send from your forms, or however you're collecting that data, but through a form, most likely, and then make see if there's an integration there, which, for example, FormAssembly, we offer these types of integrations, and have that data sent, instead of sending to Google Sheets or to an Excel sheet, have it sent directly to your CRM, and skip all those different pain points that you're running into and those manual processes that you might be running into. And those processes end up taking up a lot of time and resources. So again, when you're thinking much more efficiently and you're thinking about scaling up or scaling, you're looking at reducing the time and effort that you're putting into manual processes, and that's money saved right then and there. And a lot of times you may not have enough people to do this work, and then the information might pile up, and sometimes the data doesn't end up where it needs to be or left out. And nowadays, data is becoming such an integral part of decision making in company growth in general. This is really going to not only save you time, but help you make better decisions in the end. So in speaking of, we worked with a customer, and they said they were constantly making and receiving phone calls and trying to keep up with the application process without the tools and the resources that they really needed. And this is Sean Williams from TechBridge. He works with Big Brothers Big Sisters out of the Metro Atlanta. And this is what they were running into before FormAssembly. So they thought about this process that we were just talking about. They created a flow chart, and they definitely narrowed it down, like, where are the pain points? How can we make this easier on ourselves? How can we, instead of hiring maybe people to help do the manual work, how can we save ourselves money, focus on what we really need and collect that data much more efficiently and scale the information we're trying to bring in. And so FormAssembly was a perfect solution for Sean, because he was able to use our Salesforce integration. And what that did was he created forms, they created their applications using our forms, and that data was sent directly to Salesforce. Not only just sent directly to Salesforce, but modified and customized and sent to Salesforce just the way they needed it to be. You want to improve your data collection through better technology, and this starts with a plan. And I've been kind of already talking about this. What is your plan? I mean, the first thing is to have a conversation, and then we want to talk about maybe a flow chart of how we're collecting that data. Really visually understand where that data is coming in. Assess what data is in those forms. Are we making certain fields required? Are we able to? Are we collecting the data we absolutely need in these reports? And is that data being sent to 3 places before it actually needs to be in the final source of truth? So these are all the things that you want to consider, and you want to come up with a flow chart and a plan and understand what's happening now, and then start working your way to what you need to happen with your data. All right, number 2, set a roadmap for your data collection overhaul. So this is what I've been talking about. We created our workflow, our chart. We visually understand what's happening with our data. We see the pain points. Now we want to really start manipulating this workflow chart, this data workflow chart, and start saying, okay, we can really use FormAssembly, for example, and skip these 3 processes using one form and send it directly to our source of truth, instead of having it sent to a Google Sheet and then importing it into a CRM. So there's definitely creating a roadmap for yourself is the way to understand, and so that way you understand where you need to make the changes you need to. So what is the ideal scenario for my data collection? Again, I mentioned this as well, but you want to consider both your internal and external aspects. And when you're considering your internal aspects, a lot of times what I've seen in working with customers is, especially on a larger scale, when I'm working with customers who have a lot of internal processes, but maybe, for example, I'm going to use this example just to narrow it down so people can get an idea. Let's say you were using a CRM like ServiceNow or Salesforce. And you need data internally. You need other people to have a license in one of these type of CRMs, but maybe they only need to do 1 or 2 things, and it doesn't really make sense to give them an actual full license to do these 1 or 2 things in one profile or in one record. So what a lot of times we'll see customers do is they'll create a form and allow these internal internal employees who only need access to one record or a couple of records, they'll create a form and have that data sent internally from that employee, completes the form, and then that information is updated and recorded in the CRM as it should be. So that way you don't have to purchase additional licenses if it's not necessary. So again, you're thinking smarter and not working harder, and you're also saving money at the same time. So that's one internal aspect of thinking of the ideal scenario for data collection. A lot of external aspects as well. And those are like I've seen more recently, and I'm going to use this example, even though we've talked about it a little bit already, is the application process. A lot of times that information I've seen is sent to an Excel sheet, or it's sent, to an outside, a SQL server, but then that data is then needed to need to be reported on, or it's needed to be manipulated in a different way and ultimately sent back to maybe, for example, a CRM. So why not skip that? Is there a way for you guys to skip that and scale, and so that way you're not collecting data in so many places and then having to jump hurdles to get it into one place in one report, for example. So what teams are viewing and using data? That would also be good to add to your flow chart. Your data, what data is incoming into your flow chart. Kind of decide what teams are viewing and who needs to be working with what. Where are they viewing and using this data? Again, something great to add to your flow chart. What systems are in place to automate as much as possible? This is actually really important. This is a really important bullet point, because if you don't have systems in place, maybe having a flowchart will kind of help you distinguish, maybe we do need one, or maybe we do have one and we're not using it as efficiently as we could use it. So think about those things when you're thinking about the ideal way to set up your data to maybe one source of truth, or as close to that as possible. All right, what are the major steps in the process? What methods are you using to collect data? And this is something we kind of already spoke about. I would think this is also, just to reiterate one last time, it'd be great in your workflow chart and how you're collecting data to also discuss what methods you're using to collect the data. And that way, this should all be a part of your plan, and just laying out what you have existing already. How are you collecting data? Lay it down on a workflow chart, visually create it for yourself. I can't reiterate that enough, because it does help you get to that next step. Secondly, consider these needs. Easy to use form builder. This is, you want to think about this, because I think a lot of times we'll hear, well, do we have to hire, a new person to do this? No, it's not necessary for you to do it. It ultimately depends on what you're trying to do with your forms, but we have I would say many customers who are able to navigate, for example, FormAssembly really easily and create their forms without having a highly technical person on their staff. To think about easy to use UX and UI. You want to make your form as user-friendly as possible. And at the same time, you want to make sure you're capturing the data that's most important as well. So think about making required fields where you absolutely need that data to report on. So when you're creating forms, you also want to think about your end result. Are we collecting the data we need to get the numbers that we're looking for to help us make those decisions? Those hiring and company growth decisions. Also, consider easy to send and retrieve data. Not only do we want to make our forms user friendly and they're easy to use, but we also want to make sure that that data is being sent to a place where it's easily retrievable. Finally, what teams will be involved? This is really important, especially, and I'm going to use the word scale up again. You can do so many things, from collecting your data, sending it to one source of truth, but there's also so many things in that process that you can, when you're collecting the data, for example, you can do, for example, skip if formulas in, for example, our connector. We have a wonderful Salesforce connector and integration, where a lot of our customers will, before the data is even sent, to example, to Salesforce, it is formatted exactly the way they want. They're doing skip if formulas to only send specific data to specific records. You're doing multiple. You can do repeatable sections and have those create individual records. There's really so much you can do. You don't necessarily need IT, but you do want to start thinking, okay, in order for me to get from point A to our workflow where all the data is going to now to point B where we want the data to be, we want to also assess who can help us get there. Do we need an IT person? Do we need somebody with this knowledge on our team to help us get to this point? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. So it all really depends on what you're trying to do and how custom of data collecting and manipulating that you're trying to do with formatting. So that being said, we've talked about putting together a plan, how to get from point A to point B, what things to think about, some best practices. You know, we've heard about how another customer, what they were doing before and what they're doing now. So we've learned a little bit about what scaling means and scale up means and what that means for you. So I'm going to pass this off to my colleague Jordan, and he's going to talk a little bit more about this subject and hopefully more a little bit about the implementation portion of it as well.
All right, thanks, Katrina. Appreciate, I'm sure everybody appreciates you sharing a little bit more about what ideal scenario folks that want to create and scale processes can begin to idealize and visualize when they're looking at, you know, how to really scale up their processes. So I'm actually going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about technology and team management to build off that process and how to implement some of those plans that have been formulated just by putting together a roadmap and a process. So once you understand your ideal data collection scenario, your goals, and your roadmap for finding a scalable technology, one thing that's important is to identify that technology that's actually going to help you scale and get you to the next step. So the first slide here is titled Strive for Data Collection Agile Enough to Shift with Internal Processes. So when you're considering what technology can accommodate your roadmap, it's helpful to leverage automation and integrations that can decrease the overall time spent on the project and your day-to-day workflows. So here's some things to consider when looking for these time savers. One thing could be form pick lists that are directly connected to your database. This could be, we have a bullet point here, Salesforce dynamic pick lists. So being able to control data that's visibly displayed on your forms in a way that's easy to manage and that's centralized can be an important part of this, right? If you're updating, you know, multiple disparate data sources in various places, that can create not only confusion but a lot more work. So utilizing a feature tool such as a Salesforce dynamic pick list, where you're making changes in one database but you're affecting several different forms that are linked to that set, can be a great way to scale and automate that portion of actually the form build. Another thing that will help you scale through technology is being able to clone forms, clone content, and integration settings to your database. So, you know, if you have a form that's going to be, you know, somewhat of a template per se, or a form that's similar enough to another project that your team or another team is working on, you can have that form as more of a baseline, you know, to kind of kickstart the process in order to launch into new forms that you can then modify and make edits to. And we're not just talking about, you know, the forms themselves, but also the integrations to your database. So, you know, what objects are you working with? Where is the data being transferred once it's submitted through the form? If you can have, you know, some of those configuration settings already mapped out, and then essentially just make a copy of it and then modify it, it's a huge time saver. Have templates here. We also have predefined content. So these could be things such as custom fields, custom sections on your form, data sets. It's likely that a lot of your teams are, working from some of the same data collection types. So this is probably similar fields that you're working from, drop-down menus, sections that you need to have the form respondents filling out. If it's an internal form, there may be certain items that are default on every form that you'll want to have the options to select from. If it's external forms, you could have a similar scenario, but it's important to know that having the ability to integrate that data within your forms without having to manually recreate it over and over can save you a ton of time. Last thing here when we're talking about this technology is the ability to collaborate with your team and possibly other teams, not only on the building of the forms, but also on approving forms that are built and then publishing these forms once you're taking the forms live. So how do you collaborate on that process so that people obviously aren't confused by the process, but you can make it efficient as possible. So another thing here that's really just a byproduct of utilizing technology where these types of tools are housed in one place is eliminating unnecessary tools. So keeping all of your data collection processes in one platform, right? This is a key aspect to rapid deployment. So using a system that will be able to accommodate several different users, whether these are business users, technical, administrative, this can be a major asset to your planning, as Katrina mentioned, and also your building and scaling process. So you don't want to have some forms on one system, some paper forms, multiple systems. That doing things that way could inhibit your growth, and you don't want that to be confusing or costly. Another thing here, right? Don't add extra work for yourself. So if you have multiple systems and you have other processes that are not in cohesion together, that's obviously going to delay things. You want to make sure that the system that you have in place to collect data is easy to use, right? And we have a note here, consider the hit by a bus principle. It's a little morbid to think about, but you do want to have a system in place that people within your organization can plug into, no matter which department they're in or place in the organization that they have. All right, so we did touch on this on the technology slide just a couple minutes ago, but leveraging integrations, not only should you have these integrations available to your systems, you should be able to leverage the ability to quickly make configurations and then use predefined integrations. So what I mean by predefined integrations are integrations that are built out in systems like maybe a FormAssembly and Salesforce integration. That's something that we have built out internally, which it makes it easy for all kinds of users, whether technical, business, administrative. They can easily and quickly set up the transfer of data, from a form to a system. There's also other integrations that you could look for. Maybe it's not just moving it into a database, but maybe you take payments. Maybe you work with other systems that you need to move data to through something like a HTTPS method, right? Those are things to look for as well. And form solutions that have predefined integrations that don't require the use of an API. If your organization is needing that, obviously it's a key piece. But those are things that can really speed up the data collection process. So let's take a quick look at a great example of leveraging existing data integrations. So this is customer FormAssembly, and we'll just read the quote here. So Rebecca O'Sullivan, we devised a way to leverage FormAssembly's flexibility and create a single form that pre-fills campaign information. So our events team can have a registration form as soon as they created the campaign record, right? So this is a good example of making sure the right people have functional access to the data, but you'll also notice some automation included in the process. So they pre-filled a form, they reduce the amount of work needed to collect accurate data. You know, this is a good example of using that automation to simplify not only the process of creating the data collection form, but also the end user has a very good experience in getting that data over. There's not a lot of replication that takes place. All right, so designating process owners and getting buy-in. So who is going to own which part of the process? You know, once the how-to, the project has been defined, assigning the roles to actually carry out the next steps is going to solidify this plan. And so FormAssembly does offer roles for many parts of the organization, as your form builder tool should, or your data collection solution. So maybe you have some project leads, maybe you have some business users. As part of that planning, Katrina talked about, you'll want to distribute the workload. So having a system that does not require coding knowledge, that does not require a super high technical acumen, you know, IT shouldn't be the only department that can manage this data collection. So as it's a team project, this can be a team effort, right? And then, you know, each person can contribute where their skill sets can, you know, most effectively, you know, push the ideal image forward of how things are going to take shape. So here's an example of this. Jonathan Pugh, he's the Assistant Director of Technology and Programs at Give Something Back. So having one person in IT that manages and directs the data collection projects, Jonathan puts together other roles that have non-code-based activities. So these are activities managed by other business users in the organization. This is a drag and drop form builder tool. You know, this is a point and click integration to Salesforce. This is something that doesn't require, you know, advanced coding knowledge or formula knowledge. And these are ways that Jonathan can kind of, you know, help distribute the responsibilities to put together a data collection process that not just works for him, but it actually works for everybody, because everybody has a hand in the process and can see and use the data as they see fit. So a you know, somewhat obvious part to this is getting team buy-in, right? If you're going to work together as a team, everybody has to be on board. So this is a pretty important part of the planning process. I think an essential component to this can be, you know, using tools on a small scale at first, you know, just to ensure that you can validate the use cases that you have, right? How does data need to come in? Let's not build out the entire project from start to finish, but let's take a look at the most essential components and the capabilities of the tools we're using to ensure that we're going to be able to scale with it. So this is going to do a few things. I think a big thing that it does is it makes users much more comfortable just from the get-go. It does increase adoption as well, because if people have a lower barrier to entry with a new tool, being familiar with it, this is a great way that you can, you know, kind of set the stage and say, hey, I think, you know, we're going to, you know, begin building this out at a full scale. Having experience with the small scale is just going to give people the, you know, peace of mind, and hopefully they enjoy working with the tools as well. That's always a perk. And then, you know, kind of lastly here is think ahead. This has really been the theme of our entire presentation today, but you do want to ensure that, you know, you are taking into account your plan, and that does include people, process, as well as technology. So once those things are defined, you know, you can move ahead, start small, and then begin scaling up as needed. So as part of that, you will want to choose a technology that will grow with you. So as your team grows, that technology needs to be able to handle that growth. But also another key point to this is really looking at the ability to handle unprecedented success or really things that may not have been planned for. So an example of this is maybe you were prepared for 100 applicants or 100 submissions of form, donations, signups, marketing requests, right? But are you ready for 1,000, maybe 10,000? You know, does the solution that you have pick up the ability to handle this, right? Can it scale with you? So, you know, there are times that, you know, the projects are not only successful, but they're wildly successful. And in that case, you do need to have a solution that can ultimately accommodate, you know, that level of success. And that's ultimately, I think, the goal, right, of any project is you want to see it go beyond just your initial conception of what it could be. So definitely make sure that's in place. Looks like that is the end of our presentation, and hopefully not only did we cover information that you found helpful, but maybe we spurred on a few questions as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions and allow Maggie to add any remarks.
Awesome, Jordan and Katrina. Thank you so much for all that great information. That was an awesome overview of how to scale your data collection processes, starting from the planning portion and going all the way into implementation. And this really is advice that can work for just about any industry and any use case, whether you're collecting donations, event registrations, new customer signups, applications, whatever it might be. And so now, as Jordan mentioned, we're going to move on to the question portion of this webinar. Okay, we have a question right off the bat from one of our viewers here today. And Jordan, I'm going to have you take this one. And it says there's some great points being mentioned in the webinar, but it made me think of the following. Is there a way to prevent forwarding the form to another person? If we want responses from a specific individual, can we prevent forwarding? Okay, great question. Jordan, do you want to take that one?
I can, or Katrina can. Either way.
We could team up on it. How about that, Jordan? Go
Sounds
for it,
good.
and I'll jump in.
Yeah, so I think it depends, this specific question, I think it depends on what exactly is meant on preventing the forwarding of the form to another person. So not 100% sure here if we're looking at forwarding the responses of that specific form to another person, which is definitely something that we can do within the setup of the form. So we have the ability to make sure that data goes to, you know, who exactly needs it, when they need it, you know, where they need it. And then the responses of that form, I guess the second part of that question, if we want the responses from a specific individual, can we prevent the forwarding? So yeah, I think we just answered that one. All forms can be submitted, and once those forms are submitted, you can determine with the setup of the form where the responses go, what the end results of the user submitting the form is, whether it's another form or whether it's a thank you page or further instructions to move on from there. So all configurable points within the tool, and part of the setup that you would normally go through with a form. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Katrina.
Yeah, good points for sure. And Chris, it's a great question. So it looks like it's a two-part question, and I think, you know, it looks like we answered it mostly, but I would also add that if you don't want a form to be forwarded to another, there's really no way to prevent that at this time, but the best way to do it is to put your form behind an authentication process, whether it be LDAP, CAS, SAML, Salesforce communities. So if you only want a specific group of people to complete your form, then that's really the best way to go. And a lot of our universities, and I could say a lot of our, you know, different industries like the healthcare industry and the financial industry, they tend to do these types of things. So know that that is possible with FormAssembly, with forwarding forms. You know, who's completing them, you can control that. And the second part, as Jordan mentioned, you can control who receives notifications. There is no way to really prevent, once they receive a notification, from forwarding it on. But if you don't want them to see the response data, you can use the alias called response URL. And what that does is only the people who can log in to see the response, can see it. So maybe you can limit it that way. But again, it does matter. It does depend really on what you're shooting for here, but it does sound like there are ways to work with what you're trying to do. So hopefully that answers your question with both of us jumping in there.
Thanks, Katrina and Jordan. Chris, yeah, hopefully that addressed your issues there. You know, if there's anything that didn't cover, if you want more of an in-depth discovery and explanation of all that, please feel free to, you know, contact our support team. Let's see, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So we will just go over maybe just a couple kind of FAQs that people commonly have about FormAssembly, and maybe you do too if you're on the call. The first one we want to go over is how the Salesforce integration how it works. So we talked about this a couple times in the webinar of how people use the Salesforce integration to make better processes, to scale their processes, but people are often interested in how it kind of works at a high level. So Katrina, do you want to kind of just give a quick run through of that for the audience?
Sure. So FormAssembly, we are a Gold ISV partner. And what that really means is that since we are a partner with Salesforce, we have privy knowledge to when they're releasing updates. We have, you know, for the 411, if we still use that term, the information, you know, ahead of time. And we've got like the inside scoop, if you will, on what Salesforce is doing and what's coming out sooner. And because we are a partner with them, we're able to use and leverage that information to make one of the best APIs on the market. And really that allows us to work with any custom object in Salesforce, any record, any field, custom field. So we really can, it's really a very robust integration that we have with Salesforce. And part of that is due to being a Gold ISV partner with Salesforce, is getting that inside scoop. So we are able to have one of the most robust integrations on the market. And again, just the mapping, the things that we allow you to do, a lot of things that we talked about in this webinar for planning and getting your information from your form to Salesforce, we really are the place to be. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Katrina. And we actually just had an audience question come in that kind of goes right off of that pretty well. And it's from Julie, and she says, can you tell us more about the Salesforce campaign automation? If I make a campaign in Salesforce, can that automatically create a form in FormAssembly? That's an interesting question. Katrina, do you want to tackle that one as well, just to kind of go off with the Salesforce theme?
Yeah, you know, this is like opposite. If I create a campaign in Salesforce, can that automatically create a form in FormAssembly? It doesn't create a form in FormAssembly. We're really looking at the other way around. So either somebody is completing a form and then that information can create a campaign and also add campaign members. So Julie, I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure about the process of starting a campaign and then creating a form. It really would be the other way around, really collecting that data through FormAssembly and creating campaigns and records in Salesforce. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if not.
All right, thanks, Katrina. And Julie, it sounds like you were mentioning something from the webinar, and we may have to go back and just kind of check on that and see more specifically what the question there was. One more question about Salesforce that just came in. Can you match Salesforce leads that came from FormAssembly and other resources by email and names? Jordan, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. You can take this question. So Salesforce leads that come from FormAssembly by names and emails, yes. In our Salesforce connector, we have the ability to look up records in Salesforce, no matter which object that you're working with. So this may be account, person account, it might be a contact, it might be a lead. That's definitely a pretty common use case that we see within FormAssembly. So once a form is submitted, the connectors that are configured on the form can run to find a match with existing records that you have, definitely through names and emails, either independently, so you could look it up by email, or you could look it up by name, or you could look it up by both name and email. And the connector, you'll specifically give it a set of instructions to run. So if if there is a match found with your custom lookup, then you can update that existing record or you can create a new one. And what's great is that the connector keeps a log of all the activity. So if there's ever a question about what happened with a specific form submission, you can view that log and take a look at exactly what happened. Whether a new record was created, it'll provide that record ID along with updating existing records that were found.
Awesome, thanks Jordan, great answer. And just to go back to Julie's question, I just looked back at the slides and found the quote you were talking about. It was from Rebecca O'Sullivan at Institute for Humane Studies. And what she does say is we devised out a way to leverage FormAssembly's flexibility and create a single form that pre-fills campaign information so our events team can have a registration form as soon as they created the campaign record. So that's a good question on that, Julie. And what I think, I believe she's saying here about her use case is they created a form separate from Salesforce. So they already created a form and set it to pre-fill campaign information. So it'll pull in that campaign information from Salesforce for whatever campaign they are working on at the time, and then the previously created fields for first name or email or whatever else can be filled in by the registrant. So it sounds like it's pre-filling some of that campaign information, but they did create that form separately. Katrina or Jordan, feel free to add any other details onto that or flesh that answer out a bit.
No, that's a great point. Actually, I would like to touch on that a little bit more. So we do have a by communication. Our integration, I was talking about how robust it is. It's not only about sending data to Salesforce or campaign data, for example, Julie, in this particular instance, it's about pre-filling data as well. So if you have a campaign created, you can create a form and the data from the campaign can be pre-filled into a form, making the user experience much more user-friendly, like I was talking about UX, UI, and really making it much more a seamless process. It looks and feels automated because of the by communication process. So you're pre-filling data from Salesforce, and then the user has that information in front of them, and then they're updating it, or however you set it up, updating, and that information is then updated and sent back to Salesforce, maybe creating campaign members or however you have it set up. So perfect point. Thank you for bringing it up, and thank you, Maggie, for bringing that up too.
And I'll actually add one more thing to that, Katrina.
Cool.
We do have a Salesforce import tool, Julie. So there is actually a way that if you have fields that you'd like to be on your form that are basically exactly what you have in your campaign object, you can connect to that campaign object. You can pull down fields. So essentially what it does is it just kind of mirrors the field and it creates it into a form. So you won't have to recreate all those fields from scratch in your FormAssembly form. You can connect with your Salesforce instance. You can connect with the object. It works with campaign. It works with any object in Salesforce, and then you can pull down the fields onto the form. That usually kickstarts the form. The fields are still independent of your Salesforce instance, but that'll at least, in some cases, give you the kickstart you need to get the form started.
Yeah, great point, Jordan. Thanks for bringing that up. And Julie, to learn more, there are lots of articles in our resources at, I'm blanking on the URL, help.formassembly.com. So you can find plenty of articles there, and always reach out to our Salesforce or support team for any additional help there. Our next question here from Shira: what is the best way to prevent duplicate records being created? Email and first name, etc. Let's see, Kat, do you want to take this next Salesforce question?
Sure, great question, Shira. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this, especially when you're using the Salesforce connector. I would say the very basic way. It really depends on what the unique identifiers are that you're tracking in Salesforce, but we're at a very basic level. If you're tracking email very consistently, then you can make that a required field in your form, and you can do a lookup, what we call a lookup in the Salesforce connector. So what that means is that the user completes a form, fills out their email address, and then our connector will do a lookup in Salesforce based on email address. So if that user already exists, you have options to update the existing record, skip it, or create a new record based on that unique identifier. And it doesn't just have to be one, it can be multiple. You can do first name, last name, and email address have to match what's in Salesforce, or it can be any other unique identifier that you're working with, and it doesn't just have to be one. So let us know if that helps, Shira.
Thanks, Katrina. We have one short little question here from Rick, and it says, any objects custom as well? And I'm guessing, are you asking if we can integrate with those custom objects? And yes, we can. We're Web 2 anything. Let's see. We are getting to the end of our direct questions. And just in case any of you are wondering, we will be sending out this recording, including the Q&A, after the webinar, and there'll be a recap on our blog as well in case you want to go back and review anything. But I think that wraps up for today. It looks like the questions have slowed down. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Jordan and Katrina, thank you so much for being our resident experts here today and for all the great information. I'm sure everyone really appreciated it. So thanks, guys.
Sure thing. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Hope to see you in another webinar.